Welcome to SportsLit. I'm Neil Acharya.
And I am Nathan Sager.
One and done, making the jump, whatever you want to call it. The reason a basketball player can enter the NBA draft after a season of college, or could have, straight out of high school at one time, is in essence because of one man, Spencer Haywood. Haywood was the son of sharecroppers, Father John and Mother Eunice, who grew up picking cotton in Silver City, Mississippi. Sharecropping was a system of farming prevalent in the South following the abolition of slavery. The process involved working a plot of land, not your own, with a portion of your harvest going to the landowner, and the meager earnings in return allowed for the barest of essentials to live by. When you think of the term backbreaking work, this is it. In order to stay close to home, in a time when straying too far away could mean trouble or death in the Jim Crow South, Haywood and his siblings improvised the game of basketball where the rock might as well have been one. It was made of a croaker sack, cotton, and rags. It didn't bounce. They had to pretend it did. However, this game of make-believe would lead to the real thing, and his journey to the hardwood started as part of the Great Migration north. At the age of 14 in 1964, Haywood traveled first to Chicago and then to Detroit, where his talent first went on display at Pershing High School with coach Will Robinson, who would become a lifelong friend. Next came junior college ball, which led to starring on the 1968 U.S. Olympic team in Mexico. Division I followed, and then a pro career, which started out sensationally in his rookie year with the ABA's Denver Rockets. Everything but the contract he signed, that is. And so a Maverick owner from a rival league you may have heard of, the National Basketball Association, was ready to rock the boat in his own waters to obtain Haywood, and Haywood was more than willing to embark on the voyage. Essentially, Haywood challenged the NBA rule that a player had to wait 4 years after graduating high school in order to be eligible to play. The challenge went to the Supreme Court, and in March 1971, roughly 3 months after Spencer signed in Seattle, the ruling that the NBA regulations violated the Sherman Antitrust Act by a district court was upheld by the highest court. Instead of revelry, though, a lot of his peers felt lost because of it. It can be argued that the ruling helped the league in the long run by bringing in an influx of young talent, such as Phil Chenier, or as we may call him up here, Phil Chenier, Bernard King, and later Magic Johnson, James Worthy, and Michael Jordan, who would help save the NBA. Remember, the league was waning in the 70s and early 80s. The decisive Game 6 of the 1980 final was broadcast on tape delay. Today, it probably rivals soccer as the most popular team sport on earth. Sadly, Haywood's story weaves through these waning problematic years as well, as the glam coke use of the 70s turned into the epidemic of the 80s, when it started to be free-based, cooked and smoked as crack. That's right around when things fell apart for him, and is a major thread in a book about his career, The Spencer Haywood Rule, Battles, Basketball, and the Making of an American Iconoclast, which was released on October 6th. The scarlet letter of drug use stayed with him in large part because the NBA held him up as an example because he was so good, when even though he was far from the only player that was, caught up in any of this. And there's players that ended up on the wrong side of it, like Marvin Bad News Barnes, who Carl Subban spoke about in Season 2, Episode 1 as the player he looked up to as a young man wanting to play professional basketball. Remember The Last Dance, what Jordan saw in that hotel room during the early days with the Bulls? Well, that is what the NBA wanted to clean up. And Haywood was swept out in the process, and for decades it overshadowed his willingness to challenge the power structure and basically being the pivotal man in shaping the high-flying NBA we see today. But with the passage of time, we now see things clearly. And while the class of 2015 Hall of Fame power forward is still not asking anyone to forget that his name is tied to a low point, he also wants people to remember why you should know it in the first place, and for the NBA to put some respect on it officially.
Indeed. Yeah, well, here we juxtapose things in sports, rules that are named after a person, such as rules that are named after a person. There's a progression. We'll start with hockey because we're Canadian. The Gordie Howe hat trick, where, which is when a player gets a goal, an assist, and a fight in the same game. Gordie Howe actually only had one of those in his 32-season pro hockey career. Baseball's got the Tommy John surgery, the surgical procedure that restores throwing arms, but Tommy John didn't actually invent it. He was just the first player to, brave going under the knife. And I'm not going to do football because it has too many rules, and they seem to have new ones every week. But in the instance of our guest today, in order for the Spencer Haywood Rule to, re-enter the lexicon, he and Mark J. Spears and Gary Washburn actually had to write a book of that title to remind sports fans of his stand in the early 70s that Neil introduced. At a time when I think the economics of the business of games was finally being dragged into the 20th century, the ripple effect of, Spencer Haywood and the Seattle Supersonics, going through the courts to rock the structure of American pro sports has been huge. Now, maybe some of the context has been lost, like why, now we realize, 4 years, you got to wait till you're 22 to play in the league. That seems archaic, but I mean, that rule lasted in the NFL until I think we were old enough to start following football. That also seemed archaic was, the reserve clause or the option clause that the pro sports industry interpreted to mean as we hold your playing rights forever. And if you don't sign on the dotted line for whatever your benevolent employer deigns to pay you, we'll just auto-renew you at 90% of what we paid you last year. Chip in from Captain Obvious. People who have the clout to own big league sports teams, they expect to dictate the terms of employment. That's probably still there today. It's just that there's a lot more zeros on the contracts. But at that time when Spencer Haywood was a young fellow, there was a whole wave of athletes, labor leaders such as Marvin Miller in baseball, and entrepreneurs who weren't born into the old boy club who said, this way it's got to be is wrong. And that fight is, endless, and it's still, it's still obviously still going on today. And here we have to think of who takes up the fight and where they are in their life. The business person who decides, okay, I'm going to go start my own, start a rival league, and the labor leader who, has been through, a bazillion, arbitrations and strikes. They're, probably, established in their life. They're 40, 50 years old. The great Oscar Robertson was 32 years old and, 10 years into an inner circle Hall of Fame NBA career when he took the league to antitrust city over the option clause, which led to NBA free agency. More recent example from pro sports, Colin Kaepernick was an established 29-year-old NFL quarterback when he began his racial injustice and police brutality protests in 2016. Haywood's fight to just get into the NBA, came when he was just 21 years old. That's what really sets them apart if one thinks of themselves at what you were like at that age. And as Neil elucidated, it was threatening, not just to the old guard of owners, controlling the purse strings and, minding the gates, but the book details that there were players who felt threatened, by his stand. And they probably gave into that base impulse of, I had to suffer through it. There you go, so should you. I sound like I don't know who I was trying to sound like there, Neil, but so you can connect those dots from Spencer Haywood then to, the players now, and the dots also go all the way back to the beginning with him also connect back all the way back to the game's invention. You can actually get from Spencer Haywood to Dr. James Naismith, the Canadian inventor of basketball, in 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon, because Haywood's first pro coach in Denver in 1969 was John McClendon, who had actually been a protege of Naismith at the University of Kansas. McClendon was the first black head coach in the modern history of the 4 major North American pro sports. So there were, before reading this, there was a lot I honestly did not know about, Haywood's actual career. I sort of knew 68 Olympics and being the first hardship player, but the thumbnail sketch of him was basically just the start of his career and kind of like the wind down portion of his NBA career that you talked about, Neil. Sort of knew how he was, the guy who, put the 68 U.S. Olympic basketball team at a time when only college players could represent the U.S., put them on his back, and how that was going on. Well, John Carlos and Tommy Smith had their Black Glove protest, and how Haywood was the guy who sort of stepped in when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was, the best college player in America at the time, joined into, Dr. Harry Edwards' black athlete boycott. Definitely parallels to, when events in 2020, you think of, Maya Moore pausing her WNBA career to, get a wrongfully convicted prisoner release, or Renee Montgomery and all the WNBA players who really drove the social justice strike in sports on August 26th, 2020. So that sort of covers everything with Haywood's early career and how he, fought the powers that be. Through our season 4 guest Jeff Pearlman's first Lakers book, Showtime, I sort of knew how Haywood got so underwater with cocaine dependency in 1980. Hey, it was Los Angeles and it was 1980, right? That the Lakers actually had to move on from him in the middle of the NBA Finals. But this book filled in, everything about his early life and the in-between parts when he was in his, peak years as a player. I mean, I actually thought he was from Detroit because, that's where he went for high school and his single season of Division I college. I didn't know about his marriage to Iman, who, we know is the widow of David Bowie. Now, just to run some numbers at you, his first 5 NBA seasons with Seattle, he posted per-game averages of 25 points and 12 rebounds. And he had the team's single-season scoring record for the entire time it was in Seattle. Kevin Durant did not break it until after the franchise moved to Oklahoma City. And Haywood still holds the Sonics/Thunder record for rebounds per game in a season. And in our research, we saw a clip where the aforementioned James Worthy says Haywood was the first player he watched who would, palm the basketball in one hand and, thrust it in the face of his defender, tease and taunt and throw off and tempt him. And that was kind of part of a black style that was coaches tried to get out of the game before, basketball embraced that, athletic expressionism. I've quoted it before, but, the NBA and the WNBA are sports, premier athletic show. So hearing that from Worthy, passes on that Haywood was one of those 1970s stars who was a model for the player who came along 10, 20, 30 years later. I think a lot of people maybe think of Julius Erving. And Julius Erving was also, an early entry. He was maybe one of the first few players because he came out after his sophomore year to go to the ABA. So, it's often the second person who gets it a little bit easier, right? But Haywood's a fascinating story because, he's playing, all that stress from his early career there probably was a knock-on effect that, led to the, issues he encountered later. But despite all that, he's, a Hall of Famer on merit. His player efficiency ratings right in the neighborhood with guys like Clyde Frazier, Grant Hill, Bernard King, Robert Parrish. It's like our basketball cards collection's come to life here, Neil. So we're grateful he's able to join us to talk about his unique autobiography, which was published last fall by Triumph Books.
Thank you, Nate. Also want to let our listeners know if you want to purchase this book or any of the others we've covered so far or we're going to cover, head to our website, www.sportslit.ca, and where you can find basically links to buy these books. So please do if you're interested. And with that said, we are glad to start Season 5 of Sports Lit with Spencer Haywood next. And welcome back to Sports Lit. Nate, we have the great pleasure of being joined by Mr. Spencer Haywood. Mr. Haywood, welcome in, and I'd like to just get right into the questions, if that's okay. And me and Nate both read the book, as we always do. And, I wanted to know, first and foremost, we know that we were going to talk a lot about the Spencer Haywood Rule, but I want to ask you about your skill set. I want to describe to people that may not know of you, what was your skill set on the floor? What made you so dominant as a player?
Well, let me start a little early in my career because a lot of my stuff happened when I was a teenager or thereafter. In 1968, I was the youngest player to ever be picked for the U.S. Olympic team. And in that 68 games, which was tumultuous in his way of justice and civil rights movements and so on, with Thomas Smith and John Carlos making the final salute on the podium after they had finished the track event. But I started in 68 there, and I was 18 when I was chosen for the team. I turned 19 before we got down to the big game, and my game set was I was replacing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who boycotted the 68 Olympics, or he chose not to go and work with kids in Harlem, he said, and Wes Unseld, who decided to sign his pro contract for young listeners to understand, before 92, I think it was, you had to be an amateur on the Olympic team. You couldn't be a pro. And so Wes signed his contract with Baltimore, and Elvin Hayes signed his contract, I think, with San Diego or someone. But nevertheless, they signed their contracts, and so they invited me to try out for the team, and I made the team. And during that period, I set the record for the most points in the history of the Olympics at age 19. The age doesn't matter, but just I broke Oscar Robertson's record. Also, I broke somebody else's record. I think it was Bill Russell's record at 72% from the field. I also broke the record in the most rebounds. I think it was Bill Russell, but it was 3 records that went down, and also the youngest player in the history of America to win the gold medal. And so I was replacing 3 Hall of Famers and 3 legends at a very young age to go to the Olympics and do such a thing. And in that same Olympics, we had George Foreman, we had Bob Beamon, we had Dina De Verona, which is a swimmer, great swimmer, and we also had Dick Fosbury, who set the standards for high jumping. You know, before it was a scissor kick or it was a jump over the bar, and he went over with the Fosbury flop. So it was an incredible time, an incredible Olympics. So that's when I took my shine as a player. And even before that, I had taken some shine in Detroit because we were screened out of going to the state champions for years, for 35 years. And when I came up from Mississippi, Will Robertson, who then was my coach as well as my guardian, looked after me completely and said, look, we got a chance to win the Class A state championship. First time it would be done from the city of Detroit in 35 years. We won that, and I averaged 27 points and 26 rebounds a game in high school. And we won the Class A state champions. So that was the setting of the table of what I was like. And then right back after that, I came back to the University of Detroit after my freshman year at Trinidad State Junior College. And I set records there at the university. All of the records were rendered by me that year. I averaged 33 points, I think, 33 points and 23 rebounds per game or somewhere near that. And that was the leading rebounder in the country, and I finished 3rd in the country in scoring. And we had on that All-American team Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Pistol Pete Maravich, Rick Mount, Calvin Murphy, and myself. And shortly after that, I left college because of hardship, because of the situation that had taken place where they didn't hire Will Robertson at the University of Detroit. So I had no reason to stay, and I couldn't transfer to any place. So the ABA, the startup ABA league, was starting up. So they had been in the works for 3 years. They had great players over there, and they decided they would break the then 4-year rule, because prior to me, the ABA, NBA, all of them had a rule that states that you must be out of high school 4 years after you could only be eligible to go into the pros 4 years after your high school class had graduated. So the ABA broke their rule and said, we're going to try it with Spencer Haywood, and if he can get 5 points and 3 rebounds, the gambit would work. We can then undercut the NBA with the draft, because they drafted Kareem first, and Kareem decided, no, I don't want to play there. I want to play in the NBA. And so they lost all of their drafts. So they tried to come up with a gambit to do this, and I was that conduit. And then that season, I averaged 30 points and 20 rebounds at age 19 again, or was it 20? Anyway. And I was the MVP of the league. I was the Rookie of the Year, leading scorer, leading rebounder, MVP of the All-Star game. So I wiped everything off. So people started looking and saying, what kind of player is he? They couldn't categorize me because I was a runner. I could run the floor real well. I could shoot from the outside. I could play inside. I had bulked up from picking cotton in Mississippi. I was I was ready. I was a stern kid. And just before right after that season, the ABA, the NBA knew they was in a fight, and the ABA gave me a fraudulent contract, and that's when I moved directly to Seattle with the Seattle Supersonics. And if you want to say something in between, I can move right on through up to the Supreme Court.
I was going to say, I just feel like I got dunked on by Mr. Haywood here because, yeah, those are all questions we were going to lead up to. But you basically described the entire book. But no, you just nailed it, which was you just described the actual type of player that you were that made you so dominant, where you could score 30 points and get the 20 rebounds. Just explain that particular skill set, because we're going to ask you about all those other things as we go on. So, yeah, just strictly as a baller, as you would maybe describe, watching Kobe or LeBron, how would you describe yourself on the floor?
Well, I had the bully and the physical attributes of LeBron James, and I had the long, stretchy ability of Giannis. So it was a cross between those two. And I shot sort of like Durant. I could play way out and inside out, but I came down low because I like to feel the body of the player. And so I played out. And so interesting enough, we were on a nice call yesterday with some of my old players, Dr. J, Julius Erving, Rick Barry, Artis Gilmore, George Gervin, and the likes. We just had a long conversation yesterday about basketball in the ABA and stuff. So,
well, it's interesting. You talk about your skill set and you bring up the ABA, because in the book, you talk about the ABA was and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, compared to the NBA, the ABA was more showtime, correct? And that suited you. Is that correct?
Yes, it did. It suited me because the ABA. What had happened is because it was an upstart league, we had a red, white, and blue basketball for attraction. We had the slam dunk contest. We had the skills sets. We had a three-point line. The NBA didn't have a three-point line, so to push the ball up the floor and to see guards pairing out to the three-point line for the shot or the forwards out there, it was an incredible style of play. It was fast. It was emotional. And we had to sell our product. So it was theatrics to some degree, and they looked upon it. I remember the Celtics coach and general manager, Red Auerbach. Well, they just playing alley ball is what they're doing. They're not real basketball players. I can't wait to scrimmage them in the summertime. And lo and behold, he did, and they lost. So they was like, oh, okay, I guess this is true. We got to do something about this league.
Yeah. So, you remind me of the movie Semi-Pro, and they get the guy who was on the Celtics, and he's not, Yeah. How much does your book sort of paint the picture of how there was that sort of culture conflict between the established NBA and these. This athletic athleticism that was coming out of the ABA.
Yeah, we had all of us. Rick Barry had left the NBA and came over to do his thing, and his owner was Pat Boone. The owner of his team was Pat Boone, and it was just we could grow our hair. Back then, you couldn't have an afro, and you couldn't have big handlebar mustache. You couldn't do that, nor could you grow your if you were white, you had a mullet or your hair down your back a little bit. You couldn't do that in the NBA. It was like not a written rule, but you just didn't see it. And so over in the ABA, we tried to grow our afros to the highest of heights. Thus Julius Erving and Donnell Hillman and all of those guys who had the fro. Artis Gilmore had the big fro, and then we had the flares, bell-bottom pants on. Of course, the NBA guys was like that, but they were a little bit more refined because we were early out of college. We were like maybe 1, 2, 3 years out of in college, and those guys had spent 4 years, so they were like like Republicans and Democrats. They were conservative.
Yeah. And now, Spencer, how did you and Gary Washburn and Mark J. Spears, connect to work on this book about your life?
Well, Mark and I had been talking about this book for a while, and the late Commissioner David Stern and I had struck up some conversation at a recent Hall of Fame event, and he says, we should have named that rule the Spencer Haywood Rule a long time ago, but the time is now. And I said, well, it's not too late to do it. He said, well, let me speak with Charlie Rosenzweig, who's doing a lot of the stuff, and Adam. And he said, well, why don't we put him over with Triumph Books? They put me over with Triumph Book. I interviewed for the book, and Gary Washburn was like on deck to be the writer. And not Washburn, but Mark Spears. So Mark said, oh, yes, I want to do this book. This story is so unbelievable. And we had talked about it beforehand in the Summer League, just kicking it. And so that's how the book came together. And Gary Washburn came on because Mark Spears had a wedding. He was getting married, so he had to have some help. So that's why the second writer came on board, Gary Washburn from the Celtics. No, I'm from the Knicks. Come on, from the Lakers. Come on, it's the way it is. Celtics.
It still resonates to this day.
No. Like I was talking to Larry Bird, and he always said, "Why do you always say that?" And I said, "Because of the radio announcer, the TV announcer, Johnny Mose, I think it was."
Oh, yeah?
He was the broadcaster for the Celtics. The Celtics, the Celtics.
I got a Johnny Mose story, but I'll save it for the end.
Okay, Nate's going to share a Johnny Mose.
Now you know what I'm talking about.
At the end.
So yeah, I'm going to continue on. We're going to talk about the Haywood Rule as well, but we're progressing here. So in terms of your roots, and you talked about it already, you improvised basketball in your backyard, literally. You were imagining bouncing a ball. I wanted to know, at that time in the South, how popular was basketball compared to baseball and football? And, how did you become aware of basketball?
Golf?
No, basketball. When you first started playing basketball, you were improvising. So, with the Croker sack. So I just wanted to know how popular basketball was in the South compared to baseball and football.
Well, it wasn't popular. My first love in sport was golf because I was a caddy at the country club near our home. And it was a good way for me to get out of the cotton field because I was a sharecropper and indentured slavery. And I want your audience to understand that, in the 60s, black people in America could not you couldn't leave the farm. You had to work the farm. You had to pick the cotton. You had to plant the cotton. You had to chop the cotton. Your whole world's around this cotton field. And so you worked from sun up to sundown as a young person because no one had a babysitter at home. So you were born, strapped on your mother's back, and you go right back out into the field with everyone else. And you learn to do that as a kid. And so to me, I always thought it was like pretty hard work, but I did want to be the best cotton picker in my family. I wanted to be the best cotton picker in the county, and I was looking at let me get that medal as the state best. And it was just one of those things because my brothers, we were all in competition, and my sisters, so I wanted to be the best. So my mom said when we had downtime, you boys, you want to make yourself, you're always trying to play basketball with the cans and other things. I'll make you a basketball because we were dirt poor. We didn't have no money. So she decided, well, let's put together some cotton in this ball and we'll put in some clothing in here. And there's a basketball for you. But just remember, it can't bounce, so you got imaginary you're doing a bounce, and take 2 bounce, call it out. We've set up the rules. Call out the bounce, 1, 2, make the pass, cut, and make the basket. And you never miss the basket because the basket was made out of a barrel rim. So it was a big old basket with a backboard, and you throw it up there, it stuck and fell through. So we improvised, and we played. We didn't see basketball, but we could hear it sometime on the radio. We could get it in on our radio down there, and it always was the St. Louis Hawks. So you had that voice of the game. And then my brother, who had went up north to be raised with my aunt, he ended up being a high school great in Detroit, and then he was off to college at Bowling Green State University. So it was in the family, and so people were looking at us how we were growing, and I was just growing so tall and so fast. They were like, this guy could be a basketball player. But I was like, I want to play golf. No, there's no golfers. You can't even play on the golf course you're working on. And I was like, yeah, you're right, but we play every morning. Nobody's ever seen us. So, and then my baseball career ended early because I was playing baseball with my brother Andrew, which was my nemesis throughout my life. He beanballed me. I couldn't get out of the way. That ball was sliding in. I tried to get out, and I was like, oh, pow! I mean, that's enough baseball for me. And football, I was too gangly, so I was out there playing tight end, and I mean, my brothers was killing me. They was like, I'll beat this boy up. So I was like, oh, God, no, I don't want to just die out here on the football field. So basketball was like the last thing. So then I gravitated to it really well. I mean, once we got a ball that could bounce, because we lived near the garbage dump, so we picked up a basketball, put a patch on it, and I remember that first ball is a VOLT, vault, and you put a patch on it, and then we got a basket, and we made our own baskets, and boy, did we play, and we got in so much trouble because our field work got neglected, everything. And what was happening in the fields is I was picking with both hands, and so I got hand and eye coordination automatically. I was pulling the sack of 100 pounds at age 10 and 12, so my legs and my body was built like I was doing man work, so you were built like a man. So, and then here I come to high school, and I was playing junior high school ball on the high school team, and then they decided, well, no, he's got to get out of here because they're going to put him in jail in Parchman prison or whatever and make him stay on the farm forever because he's a big growing guy. So you got to keep that farm hand in check. So they did put me in jail for one night, and once I got out of jail, my mom said, you got to go up north, baby. You can't stay here.
And
so they put me on the bus, and here I am.
And what a story, and that's part of the Great Migration. But Nate, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think in the book I've seen you mention this. You remember seeing the Freedom Riders, coming through Mississippi when you were young.
Yes, well, we lived in Silver City. It curves around Highway 49W, which is the blues route. Everything you had to do in Mississippi, you had to go down 49W and 49N, 49 North. And I remember they were saying, oh, kids was running around. Oh, man, they stopped in Yazoo City. The word had got out that they coming past us, and we were like, oh, man, we got to go see the bus. Because we wouldn't dare think of voting or anything like that. And so we would go up there, and my mom she was just sitting there with tears in her eyes, and she said, they're going to kill those babies. They're going to kill them. And that scared us because we were like, what are they doing wrong? They just a little older than we are, and lo and behold, they did blow up the bus.
Yeah, and what's significant now? I think you said at the time it didn't seem significant, but what is it, Matt? How important is it to you now that you and Will Robinson, sat down and had dinner with Thurgood Marshall when you were a young player?
Yeah, well, it didn't happen until the case, So when I got to Seattle, let me fast forward back to Seattle,
we're
Washington.
jumping around.
We
When
are
I
going to ask you
signed-
about that, yeah.
Yeah, when I signed with the Seattle Supersonics, and I get ready to play, and I'm like, we're going to break this rule, the 4-year rule. And the NBA, the ABA, and the NC2A all sued me and said, no, you're not. And so they got a 10-game injunction. I sat and just waited for my 10 games up. And then I got a 10-game injunction against the league with the NBA for the rights to play. And they put me out on the floor. People threw things on me. You're tearing up college basketball as we know it. What are you doing? Go back to college. And I was like, I can't go back. I'm a pro. So I played under some excruciating conditions. One night in Chicago, the Chicago Bulls got angry at me as a club, as an owner, and decided, Chet Walker, you got a sprained ankle because of Spencer Haywood. We're suing him for $600,000 tomorrow, and they did. There were other times when I would get to the game and they would have an injunction waiting for me, and they would say, ladies and gentlemen, we have an illegal player on the floor, number 24, and he must be escorted off the grounds in which this arena set on. And this was in Cincinnati, so they put me out into the snow. I nearly froze to death out there. And my case in the meantime was working through the district and through the federal court and all the way to the Supreme Court. And so I finally got to the Supreme Court, and I had played some games, but not a lot of games. But and it had been, it just had been such a horrible thing for me to go through, because I thought it would be something. I thought the union, the players, and the old heads in the union would protect me, but they were told by their owners that if this young guy wins this case, you older players are going to be out of the league, because you have an influx of all these young players, Julius Erving, everybody's coming. So they couldn't support me, so I was out there on my own. But when I got to the Supreme Court, I found an ally with Thurgood Marshall and Justice Berger. So they saw my case and heard my case, and they ruled 9-0, or some say it was 7-2 in my favor. But nevertheless, I won the case and became Haywood versus the NBA, and like Roe versus Wade, like Brown versus the Board of Education, and so on. And then after the case, I was playing the Baltimore Bullets, and Thurgood wanted to have a little chat with me after the case, see how I was doing, because they wrote the ruling under the Sherman Antitrust Act that you cannot stop a young player from making a living, because we have in hockey, you can come when you want to. Baseball, you can come when you want to. Tennis, you can play when you want to. But because of the revenue that is driving the universities, there's this blind rule that you set up that you have to be 4 years past me in order to go into the NBA. So we set up this dinner. And I'm like, Will Robinson came in town because he knew the justice. They had known each other before, and that's what he was saying all along. If we can get to the Supreme Court, we'll be all right. And so I was sitting there just having my dinner. I wanted to see how many steaks I could push down that night, and I was eating my filet mignons, and Thurgood kept telling me about, son, you're gonna be ostracized for this. You must be prepared now. You won the case, but the battle might not be over. They might not ever give you credit for what you have done. I took it so lightly, and to this day, March 1st, 1971 to right now, it's been 50 years, and no player. I've made in player revenue salaries from 71 until today somewhere near $30 billion in player revenue for players. Because I'll give you an example. For a guy like LeBron, he missed 4 years of college. He gets say $50 million a year. That's $200 million extra. That's 200. That's 4 years extra on your playing legs. You're playing. What drives you? Your career. So, and they just don't know who I am. So that's why David Stern said, let's try to see if we can. Let's just name the book the Spencer Haywood Rule, and eventually somebody will come along, like the commissioner of today, Adam Silver, hello, and Michelle Roberts, who are the executive chairman of the board for the Players Association. Hello, Chris Paul, all of you guys, and you Raptors as well. You're in Toronto.
Yes.
Yeah, well, all of you Raptors, you're definitely under this ruling. So why would you call it something that is not? And they call it early entry. They call the rule, or what is the other one? Early entry.
Hardship.
Hardship. There was one and done.
The hardship.
Yeah.
And one and done. I'm like, what kind of rule is that?
Well, I mean, it's maybe up to us in the media to just call it that. You know what I mean? And then it might just take hold.
Well, however you get there, please take me there, because these players don't know who I am. I can go right into that locker room in Toronto and say, "Hey guys, how y'all doing?" They were like, "Who is this bomb?"
No. Well, listen, I do want to go backtrack on the Haywood Rule and just get some clarification on, and maybe to explain to our listeners. So, you challenged, we talked about it in our intro when you weren't on, but, you challenged the system. You had played the ABA, and then on December 30th, I think you signed with the signed with the Seattle Supersonics. And over that period of time, you're going through these injunctions, and the draft class rule for you would have been up in June 71, so only like 5-6 months after you'd signed. Did anyone ever try and convince you to just, hey, wait 5-6 months and you'll be fine? Did anyone ever kind of tell you that or try and discourage you from doing what you ended up doing?
Yeah, well, we talked about it. Sam Schulman, the owner of the Seattle Supersonics, Lenny Wilkins, who was the coach of the Sonics. He was a player as well.
Yeah.
He played and coached. Rod Thorne, we had just a meeting. He was a player and a coach as well, assistant coach. Tom Macheri was the associate coach. So kind of strange looking at those guys. They were all players at the same time they were coaching. We had nobody in a suit on the sideline, so it was just they were players.
Right.
And so we talked about it, and Sam Schulman was very adamant. Well, we got to break this rule. And Jerry Colangelo from the Phoenix Sun, he had went over and grabbed Connie Hawkins. We have to destroy the ABA. We are in battle here. And the ABA will pull all of those players, but since Seattle Supersonics, since the Supersonics and Phoenix Suns were the two expansion teams into the NBA, they had progressive attitudes. The rest of them was like, my snap tab shirt and I'm buttoned down. We don't break no rules here.
Right.
And so Sam was like pretty adamant about the idea that this year is going to be a year of sacrifice for the Sonics, and I'm going to lose millions of dollars on this lawsuit because I have the greatest legal team in the universe, and who knows what they're going to do. And sure enough, the legal bill was 1.6, I think, or 1.7 million in 70 and 71, and then the league sued him for another. I think they sued him for 1.8.
Right.
For tampering and so on. And so now all of this going on, you look at what happened with the league. The league went from 14 teams on this ruling all the way to 30 teams because we had players to pull from. Before we had to wait 4 years, so they wasn't making the moves they wanted. And also the value of the teams back then was $300 million, and now they're like $3 billion.
Right.
So everybody got what they wanted out of everything but me. I mean, I got a chance to play my career, make it to the Hall of Fame and all of that, but I just wanted one thing and just put my ruling the way it was written. Then you have examples of that. They have the modified version of my rule. They gave it to Larry Bird. He had the Larry Bird rule.
Right.
And Oscar Robertson sued as a group, as 14 teams. They sued so that they could be able to move from team to team, and it's the Oscar Robertson rule. But here it is, the most important rule for basketball. There's no name for it. It's like one and done. It's out of space. It's like,
right.
It's some universal thing. So it's just time. It's 50 years, 50th anniversary.
Have you, what's the latest? Has there been any talks on that? Have you heard anything about where that stands?
No, I've been waiting because I wanted to. I thought I was going to do the rollout this year at the All-Star game, but to be honest, I missed my date because I don't have an agent or anybody to remind me of these important dates,
right.
And to have the press get the press release at the All-Star break, because they have all of these equal rights and civil rights deals they are going through as players, and I love them for what they're doing. But this one thing they don't know about, so they need to know how they got there and why they are there. And this is the Spencer Haywood Rule. And the press is going to play a major part in this. And so if you guys can help me in any way, it would be tremendously. I'll be grateful forever. I'll even buy you a ticket to a Toronto Raptors game.
Speaking.
I know you get your ticket. Come on.
Listen, obviously this is a very important topic, and we're shedding light on a very important, seminal thing that happened in sports history that you were behind, and Sam Schulman, as you mentioned. So I want to ask you, toward the end of the book, you bring up the point that Black American sports trailblazers like Curt Flood and Muhammad Ali and yourself that made these challenges towards the courts or in the courts was because, in quote, we're Southern boys, you see things that did not ruffle. I just wanted you to expand on that quote near the end of the book about you, Curt Flood, and Muhammad Ali and the courts and sports.
Yeah, well, the three of us were there at similar times, and when I would run across Muhammad Ali when I was doing my case, and he was like, "You're too young to be here. What are you doing?" Blah, blah, blah. And Curt Flood was like, "Man, you shouldn't do it. You should back out of this one." And because he was catching so much hell from baseball, and when they just threw him out of baseball, and he left the country because he could not live in America because he sued the Major League Baseball, and they gave his ruling to Andy Musclesmith, which is kind of weird. But he stayed away for all of those years, and when he came back, the players never knew him, and he just died of a broken heart. Ali did all of this stuff for America, standing up against the war and all of that stuff, and until he got real sick, that's the only time they appreciated him. Before that, he was a militant, he was this outcast. And then for me, I faced the same thing. And we are all Southern boys and Southern gentlemen, or Southern guys. But, we saw all of that. And Rick Welts from the Golden State Warriors, he made it very clear, and he succinctly did a good statement about once we were doing a show together. He said, Spencer was cut out to do this because he had seen all of the adversity as a young player, as a young person in Mississippi. So when he saw it in the NBA and saw it how it was happening when they were throwing injunctions against me and stuff, it didn't bother me as much as a northern black person would have, because I lived through all of the things in the South. When they called me the N-word, I was like, oh, that used to be my name. And so it wasn't like, it wasn't that hard. And Rick Welts, who is, he's the general manager and I think COO for the Golden State Warriors. They've won 6 together up there, or 5, whatever tournaments, how many championships they won. Right. Rick and I was together when I was in Seattle. He was our ball boy.
Right.
And because I was 19 or 20 and he was 15, we hung together. I didn't hang out with Lenny and those guys. They were older. They were drinking beer and stuff. Hey, I want to hang out with somebody else. And so we would hang out and go over to the University of Washington and walk the campus and do all of those things as young people would do. And he'd know me from that experience because he went through it with me. And so, yeah. And the same thing with Jackie. Jackie Robinson was a Southern boy.
Right. So more willingness to just challenge, I guess.
Yes, because you're taught right and wrong and down there. You don't like analyze things. It's like black and white, right and wrong. So
right.
It's that kind of thing. So
okay.
Yeah, and
I'm just grateful to be from the South.
Yeah, and now I sort of got the sense from the book that your first 5 years in Seattle, you loved Seattle, but I kind of wondered, Spencer, how did all the stress of taking on the system, did that sort of start to catch up with you as you moved on in your career through the Knicks and then the Lakers?
Yeah, it caught up with me when I got to the Lakers because I was still ostracized throughout my career. Because I would be like the MVP of an All-Star game in Seattle, and they would take the trophy out of my hand and say, "Let's give it to Bob Lanier." So like we had three. I would be the runner-up for MVP, and it would be like Nate Archibald, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and myself. And I had the best year. It's Archibald's the year. And then the next year it's Kareem's year, so I had to deal with all of that. And then what had happened is all of the stuff that I went through during that court battle, and so much anger, so much hate and stuff that was thrown at me. And then as a kid, so much was thrown at me. All of it came to a head here in L.A. Here I am with the Lakers. We're getting ready to play in the finals. We start playing in the finals, and then my addiction to cocaine came knocking at the door, and it took me out. And so I missed my last 3 games for the playoffs, and the playoffs against the 76ers, and was suspended. Because everything had just caught up with me. I was not an addict beforehand. I wasn't an alcoholic. I wasn't a blunt smoker, although I did take a toke or two. But it was nothing, and it just all came head, and I didn't know how to address the issue. I didn't, at that time, we just never thought about a psychologist. You go into a psychiatrist or psychologist, my God, you must be crazy.
Right.
So my wife at that time, which was an international model, and Iman, who was later married to David Bowie, she kept telling me, once I got through this stuff, Spence, you gotta go see a psychologist. So right, shit, I'll go. So I went in and started seeking help, and lo and behold, I found it. I was like, whoa, if I could have had this.
Right.
12 years ago or 13 years ago, my God, I would have been the king on the mountains on Mount Rushmore. And so I was able to get help, and my young daughter, who would go to my psychologist, and she ended up being one.
Oh, wow.
Dr. Shakira, she's 30 years old.
I want to ask you about that ring, because most players will always cite a championship or championships as their career highlight. But given what's transpired with you and the Haywood Rule, and that dominant style you had, but where does that ring fit in, the 1980 ring? Given what you just said about kind of what happened and not playing at the end, where do you hold that in terms of?
It's treasured. Okay, so we all lovey-dovey nowadays, me, Kareem, and Magic, so they get me every year at the All-Star game, and they just wear me out. You messed up our 5-ring winning streak with your crazy shit. So I was like, okay, yeah, I did. I screwed up the run, because we were planning on, we're going to take these championships for the next 6 years. We got them. And so I kind of screwed it up. But that ring is very important. I have on my other ring as well, my Hall of Fame ring.
Right.
And the most important thing with me, I know it's kind of weird, but the 1968 gold medal stacks up with all of those. I mean, you don't get as high than the Hall of Fame, but it stacks up because it was my validation as an American. And when they put that gold medal on my neck, and 4 years before, I was an indentured slave in Mississippi.
Right.
And I rose all the way to the top to save America, in this Olympics and this trying time of 1968 Olympics. So when they put that medal on my neck, I just melted. I just flashed in my head, man, isn't America great, or North America? It is so wonderful.
Yeah, and
we don't hear about that enough,
It's interesting you bring up 68, just because that was going to be one of my questions, and yeah, when you won that and what it meant for you. I mean, also you wrote in the book about Jesse Owens talked to the athletes, and he was kind of tuned out. But then there was the same Olympics where Carlos and Smith raised their fists, and you were there to see the aftermath firsthand of them kind of just being. We all see the picture now and we see the impact, but we don't know right after how they were just kind of shunned. So,
shunned.
Yeah. So,
yeah, they threw them out of the Olympics, but also beforehand, it was like there was supposed to be this boycott. So you put together Jackie Robinson, Martin Luther King, all of those people who, long before they got down to Mexico City, and, Martin was killed before we got there, basically. And so they were saying, no, we want them to participate in the Olympics. It's good for African American people to see this. And so when we get there, there was this grumbling going on. Well, who's going to boycott? Who's going to do some salute or anything like that? And so they brought Jesse Owens down, Wilma Rudolph, and some of the other greats from the Olympics to just to calm the waters and explain to us the importance of the games, the Olympic Games. So we were in this big room, George Foreman and I, at the sandwich. We were like pushing food in our head, man. We were like, it's all about the food here in the Olympic Village. And so we sitting in the room, and so Wilma speaks a little bit, and we're like, okay, 64. It was okay, big deal. And so they opened the door and let Jesse came in. The door kind of creaked a little bit, it seemed like, whoa, it's Jesse Owens, man. So, like if he's one of the young people, we young guys and girls, Jesse Owens. So he started speaking, but he was speaking like, sort of like an old Uncle Tom in a way. And we were like not listening and everything and not like paying attention to what was going on and what he was saying. And then he said, hey, you pay attention to me, you SOBs. Now listen to me. What am I talking about? Y'all talking about participating in this 68 Olympics here. I had to run before Hitler. And the whole room got so quiet. We were like, holy shit.
Right.
This is Jesse Owens. And he showed the fire that we were like, oh, man, that's who we thought he was the first time,
Right.
But he was carrying the company policy when he was talking to us again. And then after that, it was like, oh, man, Jesse Owens. And he dropped the H-man on us. We're going to run. We're going to play basketball. We're going to do everything right for Jesse. So that was the journey.
Do you feel like it's, a generational thing? You just talked about Jesse just kind of telling it like it is, and then you tuned in. Like when you talked about trying to convince some of the young guys about what you did. Do you find that there's it's a generational thing too? It's just young people maybe just need a little time to grow into learning about the history and maybe appreciating, like Charles Barkley did about what you did?
Yeah, well, but if you don't know it, and see, that's why it's important that the name is on the ruling. If they don't know it, I mean, a lot of people can perpetrate like, well, I was the first guy who did it. I was the first guy who set the record. And for years, no disrespect to Moses, Malone, Darryl Dawkins, different players, said, because there was nobody to put with the ruling.
Right.
Yeah, and they don't go in history and read about, well, how did I get here? And then when you explained it to them, and the one guy that got it, was sharp on it, was Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant said, Spence, come out to L.A. This is before he passed. Come out to L.A. and meet with me in my office and way out there on the beach. So I came in town. He said, we need to do this story. We need to do the movie of your life.
Wow.
Now, I wanted
lo and behold, we didn't get a chance to do it. but he was one of the guys who got it.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, and we had an episode about the book about the Kobe Shaq era Lakers, Jeff Pearlman's book, and talked about how much Kobe really, worked to write his ticket coming out of high school. But I wanted to ask about Will Robinson, and when Neil and I were young and we were watching, college basketball, we saw, John Thompson at Georgetown, and Don Chaney leading Temple, these strong, black leaders of college teams in big U.S. markets. What was the missed opportunity when Will Robinson didn't get to become head coach at the U of Detroit where you played?
Oh, we had George Gervin lined up. We had Ralph Simpson transferring back from Michigan State with us there. We were going to be the powerhouse. It was Curtis Jones, who nobody knew about, but this was a great player. We were going to protect him. It was just beautiful. We had such a lineup prepared for that university, and we were playing at Cobo Hall. We were playing at the University of Detroit. We had a good Callahan Fieldhouse. We had everything in place. So it was a missed opportunity. But shortly after that, Will ended up being the first black coach in NC Division I history when he went down to Illinois State. And his players were such as Doug Collins and all of those guys at Illinois State. But now I was watching a documentary recently, and they were saying Freddie Snowden was the first black coach. I'm like, wait a minute here.
Right.
So that's what happened to both of us. Our history gets thrown out in the wash because it's so important to know history. And if you don't write about it or tell it, and you don't, sometimes you have to raise a little hell to get things done the right way, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm what do you call him? John Lewis, the late John Lewis, who was the Voters' Right Act and on the great congressman. I'm getting into some good trouble.
Right.
Good trouble. Nice.
You know what, Mr. Haywood, because we're just running up against time here, I want to ask you a final question, and that is about your time as the chairman of the Retired Players Association. And what was interesting to me was, there's a part in the book at the end talking about the NBPA, so the NBA, whatever, Players Association. Exactly. The heart screenings they did after Moses Malone and Daryl Dawkins died in 2015. I just wanted to know if there was any, given the high rates of prostate cancer amongst black males, if there's ever been an initiative, especially amongst the Retired Players Association, to kind of get screening put in for that.
Yeah, well, we're going to have screenings put in for that. But see, I got on the board I ran for an officer under the board that the NBA retired players should have health insurance. Right. And so under my banner, I was able to talk to Chris Paul and all of the current young players, and they put out $15 to $16 million a year for us to have all of the health insurance that they have. So that's a miracle. And so now I'm working with Adam Silver, the commissioner, and with Michelle Roberts. We are now getting ready to, you just stole my little stuff before it even be announced. We're getting ready to make an announcement about prostate cancer. Prostate cancer has hit me. I'm a prostate cancer survivor. We're working with the Michael Milken Foundation, the Prostate Cancer Foundation. They just raised $1 billion. So all three companies are getting ready to do something fantastic for prostate cancer screening, because in the black male community, we are 6 out of 10. I'll say the number again. 6 out of 10 black males are going to have prostate cancer, and because we don't get our PSA checks, we don't eat right. Like this pandemic has shown what the disparity in health, and it's not anybody else's fault. It's not the white man's fault. It's our horrible diets. We got diabetes. We got different things running through our system that is destructive. And white males, for an example, it's going to be, I think it's 4 out of 10. And so it's going to hit us So we have to do something about it. So I'm now still working as a chairman, but I'm not the chairman, on the developing programs for the retired players, which is my joy. Because, my hands are open. I can give, but I also receive the blessings from God. So this is where I get all my joy, and helping other people and helping the NBA players create wealth for them and so on. So God is keeping me around because it's something special, like that ruling.
Yes.
What's the name of that ruling, sir?
The Spencer Haywood Rule.
Yes, sir.
All righty there.
Well, you know what, Mr. Haywood, we really thank you for coming on with us today. And we look forward to seeing where things progress. And I'm sure both myself and Nate will try and incorporate the Spencer Haywood Rule whenever in our future writings or any dialogue we have. And
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
If you get into the locker room, just tell them there's an old guy out here.
Gotcha.
The reason why you're here.
Gotcha.
And you should know him. Yeah. Kyle Lowry knows. He's on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our guy, Kyle Lowry, 2019 champs.
Yes.
There you go. Well,
Yes.
you know what?
Yeah.
Thanks for your time, Mr. Haywood. And
It's my pleasure. And thank you guys for having me. It's just awesome.
Awesome. Thanks very much.